Good morning, everyone. Ooh, nice and loud. I love it. Right? Well, let's give it a go. It also allows us to live stream today's event if we use the microphones. So good morning and welcome. My name is Samantha. I am the Adult Services Librarian here at the Winona Public Library, and I'm honored to be today's moderator for our memoir panel. Memoirs are more than personal stories. They're acts of courage. They ask us to look inward, to revisit the hardest and most formative moments of our lives, and then to share them with others in hope that someone else might feel seen, understood, or less alone. Today we are joined by two remarkable authors who have done just that. Their memoirs explore themes of resilience, identity, illness, and healing, and they remind us that even the most difficult circumstances, there is strength, insight, and even hope. Let me introduce them to you. Mariah Forster Olson is the author of Hope and Despair, Childhood Cancer, and the Lifelong Journey of Survivorship, a deeply moving memoir that chronicles her experience with childhood cancer and the enduring impact it has had on her life. With honesty and grace, Mariah explores what it means to survive, to heal, and to live with the echoes of trauma. Her story is one of resilience, advocacy, and hope. James Francisco Bonilla is the author of An Eye for an Eye, Growing Up with Blindness, Bigotry, and Family Mental Illness, a powerful and unflinching memoir that examines the intersections of disability, identity, and family. Through vivid storytelling and sharp insight, James invites readers into a life shaped by both challenge and transformation. His work is a testament to the strength of the human spirit and the complexity of personal truth. So, without further ado, let's begin. We have some prepared questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience afterwards if you have more questions. You two, I'll allow you each can answer. If you don't want to answer, that's just fine. What inspired you to write your memoir? Was there a specific moment that made you feel, I need to tell this story?
Thank you. Okay. Can you hear me okay? Okay. I wrote this memoir because I wanted to, help childhood cancer survivors, let them be seen. A lot of times we feel very alone, isolated, and lonely. And so I wanted them to be able to hopefully relate to a story and to the experiences that I had. In addition to that, my medical history, a lot of the records that I had are lost because they were not digitized. I remember doctors coming in when I was a kid with just stacks of medical records that they could hardly see over. In fact, I guess it probably wasn't the doctors, it was probably the interns and the fellows and all that, but they would come in with stacks, and so I have very few of my actual records digitized. So I wanted to have my history and chronicles of my medical history in one place. I also wanted to raise public awareness of both childhood cancer and childhood cancer survivorship. A lot of times people think that survivorship is you're done with childhood cancer and that's over and done with and there's nothing else to deal with. But in fact, it starts a whole new era of what we call late effects at times for people. And late effects are medical conditions that can occur from weeks to months to decades after you get your treatments. And I had a bunch of late effects. And so I wanted to raise public awareness of that. And then finally, I wanted to share hope and resilience and kind of what I've learned from my experiences in the medical field. I was diagnosed at the age of 1 in 1980. So it's been my entire life. It's been what I've been used to, and my parents raised me on hope, optimism, and positivity. So Norman Vincent Peale's The Power of Positive Thinking was something that they told to me often. So those are the reasons why I wanted to write the memoir. And I guess just there wasn't really one moment that made me want to write it, but just this collection of reasons why I wanted to write it. So, thank you.
Very nice. All right, Jim, do you want to go ahead?
Sure.
Mike,
Oh, Mike. Can you hear me without the mic?
I need you to use the mic.
Oh, you need me to use my
Yes.
I will obey. Which part of my story is not being a very obedient child, but I've grown. So, is this working?
Sorry, a little closer.
Okay.
A little closer.
A little closer?
Yeah.
Okay. You can see how technologically gifted I am. I did not set out to write a memoir. I am, two apologies to the other academics sitting in the audience, I'm a recovering academic writer, which means we learn to write with no sense of the audience and no sense of you have to turn a page. And so when I retired, actually, before I retired, I said, well, I'd be curious about just doing some writing. And I got the idea that I would write a novel about a small town in Minnesota that was struggling with its diversity. And after about 5 years of that, I pretty much got the message that my main, they say, write what you know. Well, my main character was a Puerto Rican lesbian.
Oh.
Now, I happen to be Puerto Rican, but I'm not a lesbian. So I finally got the message at a writing retreat with an instructor, Mary Carol Moore. And she said, have you ever thought about writing your own story? And that afternoon, I ended up doing the whole storyboard, the whole outline for the memoir. So she must have been onto something there. It was just, and I didn't really think I figured a memoir about being blind and Puerto Rican, that's enough, right? Well, no. And I realized as I started to write that the issue of mental illness was really quite profound. It's a thread in my family's history, including my own. And that's what got me started writing that aspect of the story as well.
All right. So how did you decide where to begin and end your story? Memoirs are often a slice of life. How did you choose yours?
So my memoir started with a storybook couple that was deeply in love and got married, and a couple of years after that had their first child, which was me. And then it skips to me being 1 year old. It was actually just a couple weeks after my first birthday, June 6th. Which is D-Day as well, and that was our D-Day when I was diagnosed at Mayo Clinic in Rochester. And it basically goes from that storybook couple to the horrors of being diagnosed and dealing with that. Now I leaned on my parents heavily for some of that because obviously at the age of 1 I don't remember everything, but I was treated for 2 years with an experimental chemo as well as radiation and surgeries, so I do remember some of the chemo treatments. But my memoir goes from that diagnosis and it goes all throughout current day, where I talk about the late effects that I currently have and the different philosophies and perspectives I've developed and what I kind of do with them, my nonprofit work. So it goes basically from birth to now.
Again, I hadn't really thought, it's closer, okay, thank you. Yeah, yes.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't really thought about writing a memoir that included issues of mental health, but I came up with this opening scene where my mother, who suffered from pretty serious mental illness, chased me around the house with a knife when I was 5, and I had to jump out a window. And I figured, well, that's a pretty good story. So that was where I decided to begin. And again, my own experience was, I was born with congenital cataract, so I've never seen out of my left eye. And I was sent, for reasons that are explained in the book, I was sent to a Catholic reform school where a kid who didn't like Puerto Ricans threw a horseshoe at my eye. And not being a particularly good catcher, I caught it with my eye, not my hand, and it was my one good eye. So I lost most of the sight in that eye. And so I thought about starting the book at the eye accident, but because the story of my mother and her illness and how it affected me later in college seemed apropos, I went with the opening scene of being chased with a knife. And Chris Hewitt did a review in the Star Tribune last week, and he said, "That's the most intense opening of any line I've seen in any book this year." So I figured, okay. If he thought so, I figured it's okay. So that's how I started.
And how did it, where did you decide to end?
One of the things I learned in the writing process after taking a lot of classes was that memoirs are not the same as autobiographies. An autobiography will cover the whole life. And basically, I took the story from having lost my sight to having recovered my sight at 19. They did surgery on this eye. I still don't see out of this eye. And I ended up then spending probably the next 10 years being involved in the disability rights movement. Then I became a community organizer. And so I stopped it right before I went to graduate school, just as I got into graduate school. So, and I ended up being a professor, which is exciting, but not as exciting as the earlier part. So that's where I decided. Of what? Oh, I taught organizational change and leadership and cultural competence and leadership.
Okay. So did you always know you'd write a memoir, or did it evolve from something else, like journaling or storytelling?
So I decided, I was 18 years old when I decided I wanted to write a book, and I'm 46 now, so it took me a while. But when I was 18, I had major back surgery. Actually, I was 17 going on to 18 because my tumor grew out of 7 levels of my spine, wrapped around my heart, and took up a large portion of the right side of my chest, pushing against my lungs and trachea. So the doctors knew I would have severe scoliosis because radiation was done directly to the spine. I wore a back brace for 5 years, and that did not halt the curvature, so I had to have multiple fusion surgeries, and my first one was in 1997 when I was 17, almost 18. And while I was recovering from back surgery, I was watching the show Sex and the City on DVD. And in it, Carrie Bradshaw is a newspaper columnist, and she would write on her laptop. And I was kind of sick of feeling worthless and just laying there on the couch. I did my homework, but after that, just watching TV, doing nothing. So I decided to take my laptop, lay down. I was still laying down, and I just started typing up my cancer story from what I knew. And then I put it away for several years. And then I would take it out and add to it. If I had a surgery, I would add to it and talk about some of my late effects and medical issues. I've had 52 surgeries, so I had to take it out quite a bit to do that. Yes. So that's when I knew that I wanted to write a book about my life, but it really was solidified in 2018 when I started, 2017 when I started working with childhood cancer nonprofits. And I work with about 10 of them. I have a hard time saying no, but I really value all of them and what I do for them. I do different things for them. And so that just solidified it. And I knew I felt like I didn't want to self-publish. So I was kind of iffy about finishing the book because I didn't want it to just sit there as a finished piece and have nowhere to go. But I appeared on a podcast. It was a childhood cancer podcast. The podcaster became my friend, and I've been on his podcast 3 times now. But he made it his mission in life to find me a publisher, and he delivered on that. It's a childhood cancer related publisher. We are actually on a few nonprofits together, and she's now my friend as well. So it kind of worked out well, and that contract was signed in 2022, and I really worked on the book hardcore from then on, except for when I was working for the nonprofits. So
I think I answered that question. You wanna
Yeah,
go?
do you just want to remind the audience uh, about remind them how it came about again?
Sure. I had not intended to write a memoir. I was a failed novelist, and a very gifted writing teacher said, "Write your story. Write what you know." And that seemed to make some sense for me, and so that's what I did. And even then, it didn't really start out to be the book that it is today. It was really sort of listening to the muse who said, "Well, yeah, being blind and being Puerto Rican, but your mother's a story, and your relationship with her is a story, and your own mental health journey is a story." So that ended up sort of infiltrating into.
Perfect. And so Mariah kind of talked about how she started it and came back to it. Did you do something similar?
Well, no, I started with the novel, and then once I got the idea of the memoir, I pretty much just kept at it. I mean, I will say, how many people here are aspiring memoirists who'd like to do something? Okay, so a little advice for free. I won't charge anything. Get into a writing group. I think that's one of the things that really kept me. I started, but having the support of other people, listening to other people's stories, really sort of was a little bit of what fueled the engine. So I would really encourage folks to do that, and that really did help me a lot.
Perfect. Okay. Memoir writing can be deeply personal. How did you navigate the emotional terrain of revisiting difficult or joyful memories?
yeah, some of the things that I wrote about were very deeply personal, painful, emotional, difficult. I would say one of the things that was the most difficult for me to write about was childlessness, not being able to have children. We were intent on adopting, but my medical issues are just, there's too many, and we don't want a child to have to take care of me, and I want to be an active participant in a child's life. So we've decided that we're just going to be pet parents. We've got a 19-year-old Siamese cat who is wonderful. He's like a dog. He follows me everywhere and is always with me. And he should be a ghostwriter for the book because he was just right next to me the whole time I worked on it. But yeah, I think one of the things that I did during the difficult moments was I leaned on what I call my inner circle, the people that are closest to me, and I would talk to them about it. My parents and I would share a lot of things together because they were in it with me. I would talk to my husband about it. He's a great listener and takes really good care of me. I got very lucky with him. So I would talk to them. The other thing that I did was I would work on a despair part, as I call them, something difficult, and then I may work on one of the hopeful parts. I would go from the childlessness portion, for example, to talking about one of my nonprofits, which gives me a lot of joy and purpose. So I would try not to just stay in that despair part and write about the hopeful parts too.
Well, I tell anybody who's going to write a memoir to have your therapist on speed dial. And that was really part of the journey for me. I had been doing therapy counseling before the memoir, but once I got going into it, I would check in every couple of months. And I still do check in every couple of months. The other thing that I would say that for me really helped navigate was I've always been quite taken by the natural world. And as you read the story, you see different places where I'm really in pretty deep crisis. And somehow nature or wild things sort of come and help me heal. So I've continued to spend lots of time in nature. Um, so those were big. The experience of being connected to nature was a big factor in my being able to navigate the emotional part of it. Um, I will tell a quick aside. My mother ends up in a hospice, and the hospice nurse, and I swear this woman was an angel. She did 1 hour interview with my mother, and she turns to me, she says, "Well, your mother's highly manipulative, and she's gonna, lie and tell you anything just to make sure that you come in." And I looked at her and I said, "Where have you been all my life?" uh, so that was also helpful having that, validation because our mothers are not to, be difficult forces. So having that uh, therapeutic validation and then the hospice navigation. I have a friend who has a Jewish mother, and he talks about his trials and tribulations. So we would swap stories. I would usually win, but we would swap stories.
I love it. How did you find your voice as a memoirist? Was it different from other writings you've done?
Yeah, it took some time for me to find my voice. Obviously, starting at 17, 18, I didn't know, I didn't have my voice developed as much. It came with age, experience, self-reflection, and practice. Um, it was different from other writing that I had done because I had started by doing some creative writing when I was younger, but just a lot of papers for school. And my dad would help me edit those, and I got pretty good grades on them. I think I learned a lot about editing from him. He actually helped edit the book along with my editor too, but it took me some time to find it. But once I got older and had some life experience under my belt, and I think also with working with the childhood cancer nonprofits, I learned a lot more about childhood cancer and survivorship because I was pretty isolated. So that gave me some of the confidence and courage to write my story.
So one of the things I talk about in the book was I went to Catholic school for a couple of years, and the nuns, and I found out that they did this to tens of thousands of other Latino kids. If you had an accent, you were considered deficit, and so they put me into a slow class. Which if you're not a slow kid and they put you into a slow class, you create your own opportunities for. But even then, so that's how I got kicked out. Got sent to reform school. But I did internalize the message that the nuns were giving me. And it's not just nuns, other teachers did this, but they've documented a history of kids of color being shunted into slower classes. When they're retested by bilingual testers, most of the kids test out and are above average. So I think for me, the experience of having that early message that I wasn't smart enough really did haunt me for a good portion of my life. Even when I was in graduate school, writing my dissertation, I ran across one of the other people who were at UMass Amherst. It was a woman named Valerie Young who's written about imposter fraud, fake syndrome. And I realized, oh, I've got imposter fraud, fake syndrome. So it was one of those things that I had to work on myself. And I think that sort of helped me find my voice. The other thing that I would say that's a little bit, woo-woo out there, but it's okay. I have really found that listening to the inner muse is really important. That, particularly being trained as an academic writer, you don't listen to the inner muse. And it was the muse who told me about writing about nature, about how to build resilience. And that's continued to be part of my experiences, doing those things. That must be my cue to stop.
All right. So this next question is probably my personal favorite. Has writing your memoir changed how you see yourself or your past?
It did. When you're living your life, you don't kind of see how much. Well, when I was living my life, I didn't kind of see how much I had experienced and gone through until I put it into words, and I had people. I heard feedback about the book and about how much I had been through and all that, and I didn't really realize it. It's difficult to see the bigger picture when you're just living your life, and stepping back allowed me to see the magnitude of what I had gone through, and that I had a story to tell because I doubted myself a lot during this experience, whether I had a story or not. And so in the last few years that I worked on the book, I realized I did. So it definitely changed how I saw myself. And people told me I'd overcome a great deal, but it wasn't until I put my life into words that I realized that.
I have two things I can say about
Mike?
Mike. I'm not a quick learner. I guess the nuns were right.
I was going to say there's always one.
One of the things that I came to realize in the process of writing the book was how blindness didn't just happen to me, it happened for me. And by that I mean, when I was in Catholic school, I wasn't getting much attention because I had the eye accident. They didn't have any services back then in schools, in Catholic schools, for kids with disabilities. So I was forced to go to the public schools. And there, in New York City at the time, 80% of the Puerto Rican kids in the schools were not graduating high school. A lot of that had to do with lowered expectations. Because I was now legally blind, I got extra services. I got extra attention. And, I think that's a formula for success for any kid. But for a kid in a public school system where Puerto Rican kids were not getting much attention, I think that sort of saved my cookies from the fire. The other thing that I would say, in the writing of the memoir, I had been doing some family history. And in Puerto Rico, godfathers, godmothers are a big deal. I don't know about in Minnesota, but in Puerto Rico, big deal. And my father's godfather was a guy named Pedro Alviso Campos. Pedro Alviso Campos was an independentista revolutionary in Puerto Rico back in the 40s and 50s. I don't know if you remember the attack on Blair House by Puerto Rican quote-unquote terrorists back in the 50s and 60s. He was behind all that. And in the process, I realized, I have this sort of organizer activist stuff running in my veins. Okay, that makes sense. So that was actually helpful.
All right. So this next question is for the aspiring memoirists out there. What advice would you give someone who feels they have a story to tell but doesn't know where to start?
So I have a couple pieces of advice. The first is to just start writing. You don't have to start at the beginning. It doesn't have to make complete sense right away. It doesn't have to be complete paragraphs, just start writing and let your thoughts spill out onto the page. And the important thing is to just begin. Once you start, then that story will take shape on its own. And it's always the most difficult to start a project, I think. So if you just start writing, you don't have to begin that project again. The other thing I was told, which you alluded to, was to read as many books as possible, whether they're memoirs or any kind of books, so that you can get different perspectives on how authors write. You can, adopt different things from what they do, hone in your writing and how you do it. So that's another piece of advice. And then publishing was a big, I feel like, hurdle for me, just knowing what to do. So I was gifted, what was it? Getting your book published for dummies, which was very, very helpful. There's also a self-publishing for dummies book too. And so just reading about it, I did some internet research as well, was helpful. I think it's always helpful to just get information on things that you don't know as much about, to help kind of take the mystery out of it. So those would be my pieces of advice for anybody wanting to write.
I think one of the reasons I never thought about writing a memoir was in taking this writing courses that I took. It was said that, unless you're a celebrity, nobody's really interested in a memoir. And I was like, oh, okay, I think I'll stick to my novel. I think what changed, and that was like 10 years ago. And what I'm noticing now, the memoirs are becoming more mainstreamed, and it is not sort of so much frowned on. I had always journaled, and if you were an aspiring memoirist or any kind of writer, I would really encourage you to journal, because sometimes things that appear in your journal that you would never think you should put on the page end up coloring how you're going to write. So I would say journaling is a good place. Even if you have a day where you can't write for the book, journal and say, I'm having a hard time. I would also really encourage folks. So I see myself as sort of a lazy writer, that unless somebody's going to hold me accountable, I'm not going to turn out the pages. So I got into writing. I got into 2 writing groups at the same time. And I will say that that's been, Terry is here. She's one of the writing groups I've been in. And, knowing that it's Tuesday night, 11 o'clock, and Wednesday morning there's going to be a writing group, boy, it just really lights the fire, And it's also wonderful getting feedback. That's one of the other things that keeps your writing going, is getting feedback. I agree, reading memoirs for me. I had not read many memoirs before I started this, so that was a really nice piece of advice. There are 2 other things that I would suggest. We're quite lucky in Minnesota to have the Loft Literary Center up in the Twin Cities. And they have classes online and in person as well. And I found those classes really, really helpful. The other option, there's also an online program, a woman named Jane Friedman, that offers workshops. And they're really, well, hers aren't so cheap, but she has some really amazing people come and do a workshop for $25 online. And some of those have been just astounding. And then the last thing, which is absolutely free, is there's a website called Craft Talks. And they will often do something on a Wednesday for an hour on a subject. And again, no cost, but you also get to hear from other writers in the process. Because I do think that writing, or at least for me, I don't know if this was your experience, can be a very lonely experience. You're just you and the page. So I think it really makes sense wherever, at least for me, to connect with other writers and have a writing community. Because I think, again, that both it builds accountability, but also overcomes that sense of isolation that writers, there's a reason why a lot of writers became alcoholics. So I'll stop there.
If you could go back and give your past self a message, what would that message be?
So I grew up feeling like a freak. Just I would get all these medical issues, and the doctors were not sure. They wouldn't say that they were from treatments, but I think that was because they were experimental treatments, and they wanted to kind of cover themselves. But now they're known late effects from the different medications and radiation and things that I had done. But I would tell myself that one day you're gonna appreciate being different. Um, I think that it's people try to fit in, and I try the same thing. I try to fit in, but it's also nice to be different and to have something distinguishing about yourself. And the thing that made me different is what made me find my community, the childhood cancer community. Once I found them, I just all of a sudden felt like I belonged. They understood without me having to explain myself. And I did one of the first things that I did was a survivorship speech at a neuroblastoma conference, which is the type of cancer I had. And I usually would get quite nervous for things like that. But when I got there and listening to the other speakers and, feeling the love and understanding in the room, I just felt like I belonged, and I didn't feel quite so nervous. So that's something to celebrate is to feel like different, but also finding my community and having a sense of belonging as well. I would also tell my younger self to stop being so hard on myself, because I am very hard on myself. I still am, but I've gotten a little bit better. So um, I would tell myself that. Um, and then most importantly, I always worried about finding the right person. My parents found each other in high school, and I didn't find my significant other in high school. But I would tell myself that I have nothing to worry about with that too. So
So one of the things, yeah,
Your name is not Mike.
it should be. One of the things that I've come to understand in the process of doing this is that I really did internalize a lot of negative messages. Um, One was, well, because I didn't speak Spanish very well, because the nuns told my mother, don't speak Spanish to him. And my mother was like, if the nuns told her to jump, she would ask, how high? I didn't feel Puerto Rican enough. I'm light skinned. I didn't have an accent. I didn't feel Puerto Rican enough because even when I was legally blind, I was pretty high functioning. So, people would say, well, you don't look blind. There's a great story. There's a story about a guy who was sitting at the BART station in San Francisco, and he was reading, and he had large print newspaper, and he had a dog, but some guy walks up to him, and because he had a cane and a dog, the guy literally says to him, "How can you be reading? You can't be blind." So the guy doesn't think cannot be blind. So he reaches into his case, he puts on a pair of sunglasses, and he just goes back to reading, which I thought was a great response. So the idea that I wasn't Puerto Rican enough, that I wasn't blind enough, and that I wasn't smart enough. And I think those were things, I don't know if I could have told myself that differently. It wasn't really until I got older, get that benefit of getting older, and doing my own work and doing my own research, that I think, so those were the other dilemma for me growing up in the age that I was growing up in was that there weren't a lot of services for mental health services around, particularly if you were a single mother and you were Puerto Rican. So, she didn't get very much help, and I didn't get very much help. And, she would often tell me what a bad son I was. She was angry at my father, but it got thrown onto me. And, I don't know what I could have done differently about that, but I do want to make more time to advocate for services, mental health services.
All right, so let's give our audience a little bit of an inside scoop, if you will. What is one story that you left out of your memoir that you still think about?
Yeah, so in the cancer world, there's something called a cancerversary. Yes, like an anniversary, but cancerversary. And it's a celebration of basically any event in your cancer journey that you want. So I celebrate, I never did when I was younger, but when I learned about it, I celebrate the day that I was diagnosed. So this year, I celebrated 45 years from my diagnosis. Yeah, thank you. But in 2020, it was my 40th cancerversary. And if you remember, 2020 was the year of COVID. I had been planning to do what we called Mariah's Celebration Fundraiser, which I didn't want just a party to celebrate or have the focus on me. I wanted to do something good with it and raise money for some of the nonprofits that I work with. I couldn't choose just one, so I chose four. 4 out of the 10, I thought, I know, 4 out of the 10 I thought was pretty good. So I wanted to have it in person, but there were no large gatherings at the time. And so we had to have it virtually. So I had no idea what to expect, but one of the things that we did was a massive silent auction, and then the day of that the event was supposed to take place, we did kind of a program where I talked about my cancer diagnosis and what I was doing, and then kind of interviewed the people that were in charge of the nonprofits or that worked with the nonprofits that were getting the money. And we ended up raising $20,000, which I'm not a fundraiser. Like, it's not one of my fortes. It's something that is difficult for me, but I thought that 20,000 was pretty good, especially for virtual and at a time during COVID when things were so uncertain. So it was really overwhelming and heartwarming, and provided a lot of hope to see everybody show up for it. And I left that out of the memoir, and I kind of wish I would have kept it in because it just shows my love for nonprofit work and people coming together and providing hope, but it didn't make it into the book.
So in my book and in my life, I realized that I kind of was a bit of a don't follow the rules kind of person. As you can tell, it's technology. So one of the things that I have a chapter in the book about becoming a blind messenger in New York. And I basically memorized the New York metropolitan subway system and became a messenger. And, people maybe a blind messenger. And in the end, I was giving tourists directions how to go places. So, that was a little bit of the flavor. There's one of the writing courses I took. They prepared you that when you're writing your final edit, that they're going to quote unquote kill your babies. This means some of your favorite chapters are going to get cut out. And one of my favorite chapters was I had a college instructor who just was a real cheerleader and said to me, I was thinking about going to London, but I was only a junior. So I was a sophomore, and you weren't supposed to go unless you were. She says, "Oh no, I'm the oldest and most senior faculty. If I want you to go, you're going to go." And sure enough, I'm on the plane to London. We had a break in England during the semester, and I got my Eurail pass, and I had an aunt and uncle in Spain. And so I took the train down to them, and I got there on a Sunday. Unfortunately, he lived in a little town outside of Malaga called Fuengirola, and the bus didn't go on Sundays. So, I figured, well, yes, I'm going to hitchhike. So, I mean, again, blind hitchhiker is a little odd. And this was during the period in Spain when Franco was still in power. And Franco had these notorious Guardia Civil, henchmen who went around with these gray black uniforms, white helmets, blue guns, and they would wait at the train station with photographs.
Oh.
And as you got off, if you matched one of the photos, you were in trouble. Luckily, I didn't match one of the photos. So I get outside the train station and I said, how far is Fuengirola? They said, 9 miles. So I stick up my thumb. And I'm hitchhiking. It's a really hot day. It's along the Gold Coast. There's a nice view out to the Mediterranean. And finally, this motorcycle comes roaring by. And I'm like, oh, all right. And I go running up to the motorcycle. And then I notice the guy's got a big white helmet. And he's dressed in gray. And it's a Guardia Civil. And he's really angry. He says, where do you think you're going? I said, well, I'm going to go visit my, aunt and uncle in Fuengirola. He says, yeah, what's their names? He said, I think he didn't believe it. And, I told him his names, and he's really, and people would disappear all the time with the Guardia. And he says to me, rather ominously, get on the back of the bike now. And he starts driving. And then he starts going up this isolated mountain road. And I said, we just walk up the dune. And in this isolated mountain road, it turns into this little development. And he powers down the motorcycle. And if you're much of a motorcycle rider, you hear that tick, tick, tick as the engine cools down. And then I hear from this house, oh, Jimmy! Jimmy is here! He knew my aunt and my uncle.
Oh.
But, I think I lost like 10 pounds that day. So, yeah. Have you been to Malaga? Yeah. The buses don't run on Sundays. So.
Okay, so now I am going to open for questions from the audience. I will repeat the question so it makes it into our video feed, and they will answer with their mics. Are there any questions? Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm a retired nurse, and I'll just say nurses, doctors, healthcare providers learn a ton of people they take care of. And so the next thing, though, is I read a lot of memoirs and things. I always look for memoirs about personal stories like that. But I think more importantly, people who have the conditions in past learn a lot by reading somebody else's experience because, for that person, it's like what an experience, but it's new to them. There's so many emotions and concerns and questions and just listening to you two just now, there were little sparks of information on what it's like. So I wanted to just give you that feedback, and then I forgot to suggest that you send a complimentary copy to some of these, organizations. This I've written this, and maybe people have that condition and be interested in that. So it might be some way to get your story out there to reach people that
Yes.
I will say one of the nonprofits that I work with is the Neuroblastoma Children's Cancer Society, and they get a portion of the proceeds from the sale of the book. But thank you so much for your feedback, and thank you for being a nurse. I don't think that they get enough thank yous, so I always I think I overthank the nurses when I'm in the hospital. But it's important because you guys do very important work, so thank you.
So I tell the story in the book because my eyesight plummeted quite dramatically at one point, and I had to go in, and I had to see this very high-priced, expensive Park Avenue eye surgeon. And I went in, And I was 19. I was kind of full of myself. And after 10 minutes, he gets up and he starts to show me the door. And I said, I have more questions. He says, I'm very important and there's a lot of people. And I said, well, you know, and I was sort of a little badass looking Puerto Rican kid. And I said, well, unless you've got a bouncer, you're going to answer my questions. And he was not a big guy. And he did answer my questions. But that night in the hospital, or the night of the surgery, before the surgery, I was freaking out, completely freaking out because I felt like I was a pretty well-adjusted blind kid. I was like a poster child for being legally blind. And you know, and finally a nurse came in. And I'll remember this woman till the day I die. She was a big African-American woman. And she said, honey, you want something to sleep? You know, and I said, no. And I started to tell her. And she said, you know, I've known this doctor. His name's Sheldon. He's long dead now. Feldman does 40 of these operations a week, you know, and I've never seen him flub one. You know, he has to pay for his Park Avenue mansion and his house in the Caribbean and his BMW. Honey, you're going to be just fine. And it was more than any, and I went to sleep after that. But it was really the caring of the nurse, not the doctor. Oh, and I was told this later when they wheeled me into the surgery room. I was sort of still just getting under the effects of the tranquilizer, whatever they give you. And the nurse told me that I looked up at the Feldman and I said, you better not F this up. It's a really stupid thing to do when you think about it. But the nurses were lovely.
All right, so just so we have that the comment was from a retired nurse, and it was about getting books in organizations that help kinds of things. So are there any other questions? Go ahead, Catherine.
Mariah spoke about how you got your book published, but I don't know that you've spoken very much about how you got your book published.
Okay, so before Jim says anything, the question is about how he got his book published.
Yeah, and this is where I know that they're spirits and they're taking care of me. Because I had been in many, many writing classes and people would talk how about they sent out, 40 to 100 queries for, and I sent out 2. And the first one I sent out, Milkweed Press said yes. But the guy said, but, I have a long backlog, so it may be a couple of months. And meanwhile, I had sent out one to the University of Minnesota Press. The guy called me back within a week and said, yes, we're going to do it, and we can start right now. So I sent out 2 queries, and both said yes. And I don't tell the story in front of a lot of other writers because I'm afraid they can hurt me. So.
Well,
Go ahead, Ken.
how much did the editors at the press take out of your story?
So the question was about how much the editors took out of Jim's story.
So 2 of my babies were killed, but, it was okay. Part of it is the editor that I had at the University of Minnesota Press was just a lovely, lovely man. I think the big challenge that he took on the book was the structural edit, because I had certain chapters here and certain chapters there, and he really helped me rethink how to edit in a way and to structure it in a way that flowed more smoothly. I don't know if you want.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. My editor took out very little. She likes to keep the author's voice in it. But I did have, so in the inner circle part where I write about my loved ones who give me, love and support, I had a portion about my cats because they've been a big part of it. I just have one cat now, and that was a huge section that I wrote, and we cut it down to just a little bit because it's not a book about cats. But my publisher / editor / friend thinks that my next book should be about the power of pets, and I said, can I have a little bit of a break first? So yeah, we'll see about that.
All right, Ken.
I just was curious about how you found your rating groups. How did you find your 2 rating groups? And do you also have a rating group
Okay, so the question was about writing groups and how do you find writing groups, and does Mariah have a writing group?
So the first writing group, I felt, for a person that's no longer legally blind, I fall into things quite a bit. And I was at Madeline Island School for the Arts. They have this week of writing retreats. And over the course, I think I was probably there 6 or 7 years, people started just networking. And finally, somebody said, let's start a writing group. So we meet every other Wednesday. The other group, and I'm trying to remember how I got hooked up to this. Maybe it's you, Terry. I'll blame you. Sure, fine. There's a group in La Crosse that meets every other Thursday or first and third Thursdays, and now they're meeting on Saturdays. And I don't know how I initially found them, but I started going, and it was yeah. I mean, the other reason that I think writing groups are so helpful was, I had to unlearn being an academic writer. And, as soon as I would start to throw academic ease into it, these folks would say, Bonilla, stop being a professor. And it was really helpful because I think it made it much more readable. So.
I don't have a writing group, but I did have several people read the book for editing and for flow. I also I sent it to my to a doctor, not my doctor, but a doctor to make sure that the medical jargon was correct, because I tried to do a balance of explaining things if you did not know anything about childhood cancer, but also explaining things if you had somewhat of a background. So I tried to, it's a very difficult line to straddle, but I tried to do that. So I had a doctor read that. And then some people also requested, when I asked them if I could use their name in the book, they requested to read their section too. And I got some feedback from that as well. So, yeah.
Okay.
I just have to piggyback a little bit again for the writers about getting started writing. It may be the case that you've got one or two or a handful of chapters that you feel really good about, but the rest of it isn't quite there yet. I ended up sending out chapters that I had finished to different. There's lots of online contests, and the Wisconsin Writers Association had one, and I got honorable mention. And let me just say that really opens doors with editors and publishers. If they see that somebody's already appreciated something that you've done, even if it's a small piece, and that really was a big boost in terms of writing. So I would encourage, even if you've only got a few chapters done, but if there's some that you really like, send them out.
Okay.
I have different questions for you, but Jim, in reading your book, one of the really exciting and inspirational parts of the book were all those very unusual circumstances or opportunities that you took advantage of. And in all part, not just locally, but it was broad. And I wonder what that was like for you as a person legally blind, to find the courage to go out and do these things.
So the question was about James's courage and how he found the courage to go out and do a lot of the things he did.
Well, some of it is just being dumb enough not to know better. I had one professor in college. I think I talked about her. We called her Annie Oakley because when she was in school at Wesleyan, she was from the backwoods of Pennsylvania, and she took her squirrel gun and shot the weather vane off the administration building. So when she came to Cortland, she had this reputation, but she was like a fierce advocate for me. And she was one who said, "You're going to London." And it was like, okay. I mean, part of it was just, okay. The other story that I will tell that's also in the book was sometimes people that start out as your nemesis, like my mother was very difficult, as you'll see in the book, but she was also a fierce advocate. And, I benefited from her fierceness. The other quick story I'll tell was I was at summer camp and I was going to be the first blind counselor hired at a camp for the blind. And the director, made me this offer. When I told my mother, she said, absolutely not. You're not leaving me in New York City alone. And I was, and if you take that job, I'm throwing you out of the house. Well, I pretty much decided I was going to take the job, but I was going to also be homeless. And I told him, and he called my mother, and at that evening program, he came up to me and said, Jim, I talked with your mother. Come see me tonight. I have some good news. Well, I went after the evening program to his cabin, and there was another guy in the cabin, and they were clearly drinking. And when the door closed, this other guy came up behind me and pinned my arms, and the director was getting ready to sexually assault me, and I broke his nose with a kick, and then I got away. You would think common sense would say, stay away from that guy. He ended up writing me this amazing letter for college that got me into college, some of my first jobs. So part of it is learning, there's bad things in people, but there's also good things in people, and don't be hesitant to take advantage when they can do you some good. So does that get at your...
For you, I've read your book, I will. But I wonder about that diagnosis, and I mean, I can't imagine what the journey is like, but how rare is it for someone to survive that kind of cancer? 40 years.
So the question, real quick, was about how rare is it to survive Mariah's kind of cancer?
So it's a little difficult to say because there wasn't the testing back then that is available now. So we don't know certain things about my tumor, but I will say that advanced neuroblastoma today has a 50% survival rate. Intermediate has about 90 to 95, and and then the basic stage is about 95% survival rate. But advanced is about 50%, and it is quite rare to have somebody that's 45 years diagnosed. When I went to Mayo and saw a radiation oncologist in my late 30s, he was kind of fangirling out a little bit because he had never talked to a survivor of neuroblastoma of that many years. So yeah, it's rare. I do know though that there in one of the groups that I moderate on Facebook, there are 2 women that are in their 50s that survived neuroblastoma. So I'm not the oldest, but in this area, or at Mayo, I think I'm one of the longest running. There's all of my doctors and nurses that have not retired. But yeah, thank you for the question.
All right. Oh, there's a question back there from Ken.
So I guess in terms of needing parts of the book around, it's a picture.
Okay, so the question was Ken is writing a memoir about his father, and he is asking if it would be fiction or memoir. Mike.
Thank you.
In his voice.
Yeah. Well, I would say start writing it because it may change. you know, one of the things that I've just noticed is people start writing, and the outlines of the story and sometimes the main characters change. So it may be him, but my story, I was kind of really clear that I didn't want my mother to take over the story. And the more I fought that, the more I realized I had to let her in. So, I think exploring your relationship with your father, and I mean, there's a memoir called Tasha, and it's about a son's story about his mother. But you also learn a lot about him as a man. So as a man writing about a father, there's all kinds of really rich material there for you to mine that I would, and I wouldn't worry too much at this point about whether it's, fiction or nonfiction. One of the best quotes I've heard is a woman describes memoir as the art of memory. And, in art, you create, and it doesn't necessarily make the story untrue. It's just that you've, done some work yourself. And so I think there's it sounds like a pretty rich potential in that story. And it just keep writing and see what people's reactions are. If you're not in a writing group, use that.
I was actually going to say the same thing to maybe explore you writing the book about your father from your perspective. And then that way, it's you're remembering what it is, and you can always, if you don't feel like it may be exactly true to real life, but it's your memory, you can always put like a disclaimer or something in the front of the book that says, this book is to the best of my recollection or to the best of my memory, something to that effect. So
I would just come back to my original suggestion: get a therapist. Get a therapist, because no, you sound like your father. Because I think it is something real rich, mine. And in the process of writing, even if you don't do a therapist, start journaling about your reactions to the writing, because I think that'll uncover some pretty rich material.
This is memoir, this is nonfiction, this is fiction.
I'm going to go ahead and take this from a librarian or publishing standpoint. So, if you're writing from your father's voice, a publisher or a library would call it fiction because we're not sure how true those stories are. Now, if you're writing about your father from your point of view, then that is going to be considered nonfiction. Does that make sense? Our book club for our band books club just read The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. While he did serve in Vietnam over a 2-year period, and his stories would be considered a memoir. He also has stories about other people that aren't his stories. So his book is considered a work of fiction. So if you're writing about somebody else or from somebody else's voice, then that's going to be considered fiction when you send out like a query letter. Are there any other questions?
Well, I would just add, based on true events. This is a work of fiction, but is based on true events, and I think that gives you some leeway. See, notice how I'm breaking the rules again, but I would go.
Well, they're movies. There's a whole, you go through the Netflix menu and you get to the movies based on real life,
So again, if they're based on real life, if we're going to classify them in a certain genre, like here in a library, we're not going to put them with our documentaries and our nonfiction. They're going to go in our fiction collection. So the question was about audiobooks and whether or not they would do audiobooks.
So one of the things I've learned about issues of disability, that accommodations that are made for the disabled have tremendous impact on the non-disabled, like ramps, like audiobooks. And I've been reading lately that this generation particularly doesn't really do a lot of reading, but they'll listen. And several people have said to me, well, when it comes out in audiobook, let me know. And I don't think they're being sarcastic. I think they're being real. And I'm learning right now that some of this, like the University of Minnesota Press, will sell their rights to Audible, and then Audible will publish the audio book. But I think you have to show some good sales before Audible is going to be interested. And if Audible is not interested, I already have somebody I know who could narrate it. I just got to figure the technological wherewithal to get it put out there.
I have my book is available in paperback, hardcover, and ebook. And I have a friend that had, she's a brain tumor survivor and has difficulty reading for long periods of time. And she discovered that in the ebook, there's something that you can do on the Kindle to make it read out loud, actually. Yeah. I'm not exactly sure how to do it, but she discovered it and told me about it. And so, but I'd love to. My publishing company does not do audiobooks yet. We are looking into it, and I would love to be able to do that because I've heard from multiple people, well, I don't really read, so I'd like to listen to it.
So I have a follow-up question, and James already kind of answered this question. He said that he would have somebody else narrate his audiobook. Would you do the same, or would you narrate yourself, Mariah?
If someone else would do it, I'd have them do it. But if we were, I'm on the board for my publishing company now. If it's something that we needed to explore and I would have to do it, I'd probably do it.
Okay.
One other just last thought about this publishing audiobook stuff. I found out that the New York City Public Library has a department that what they do is they translate books into audiobooks. So that's another possibility. I remember getting some of those books 30 years ago, and they would just put me to sleep. The readers were terrible. And I think part of what it is, the person who I would love to do mine is also an actor. So I think that's part of the deal, is getting somebody who can
That's
capture
expressive.
the emotion.
Yeah.
So
Many authors are just so boring to read their books.
Or the Society for the Blind still do the readings that they used to do. When you used to be, I used to go and read, and they had a radio program where blind people would tune in and listen to the books being read. And you could read like so many chapters of
So the question was about the radio and whether or not there's still a program for the blind to listen to the books.
you said the Minnesota Association for the. Okay, I'm writing this down.
So just real quick, there is through the Minnesota Braille Library, those who have vision issues can get permission from a doctor or a librarian to be part of a program where they'll send you books on tape on a special device that's made so that it's easier to listen.
I think that's the way with learning disabilities too.
Yeah, yes, a teacher can also sign that. Yeah.
I would probably pursue them if Audible turns us down, because Audible has this whole platform where you can just go and order the book up and for your road trip. And I'm not sure some of the associations for the blind have that kind of technology, but I would follow up on that. Thank you for that tip. I'm going to call them and say, C told me to talk to you.
All right.
Forgot to turn on my mic. Okay. All right. So I'm going to conclude the program, and I would like to thank both Mariah and James for their honesty, vulnerability, and wisdom. Your stories are not only deeply personal, they are also deeply generous. You've given us something to reflect on, and I know many of us will carry your words with us long after today. To our audience, thank you for being here, for listening and holding space for these stories. If you haven't read these memoirs, I encourage that you do so. They are powerful reminders of the resilience of the human spirit. Please join me in giving a round of applause to Mariah and James.
So I'm just going to tell you, Mariah, you said you have some books. I have some books here. We are wanting to get the story out. We're available to sell those. If you didn't bring any money with you today, I'm going to still invite you all on Thursday at Blue Heron. There's going to be a launch party where there'll be some Blue Heron, amazing appetizers, little salsa music, a slideshow, and I have some flyers for that. So if you're interested, just come up and I'll give you one. So, but thank you.
And Mariah, your book is also available to purchase online?
Yeah, it's available on Amazon online, on Barnes and Noble online, and then I have a few with me today, just in case.
I just found out that second chapter,
Chapter 2.
they got the books in, so you can buy it there.
All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Hello again. Good to see you. Hey, Marilyn. Yeah, he wants to buy a book. No, that's okay. He gave me one of the books. Okay, I was
And remember what it said.
Jon. How much are the books?
15.
Write a check.
I know where to find you, so yes.
Oh.
If I didn't know you, I won't take a check.
You will or you won't?
I will.
Let me see. Maybe I can find the rates. No, that's okay. Action just
Yes.
are you yes.
No.
Okay. That's perfect. Okay.
No, they're not signed.